How do you want to be seen? How does your inner self relate to the outer world? Imagine wearing a mask that you made, bringing to life a character entirely imagined by you and adorned in whimsical fabrics and textures of your choice. Perhaps you choose to be photographed in this mask, in a bed of daisies, along a riverbed, or perched on a hard concrete ledge. The choice is entirely yours. The masks we wear are often seen in a negative light. But what if masks existed as a tool to inspire, to liberate, to empower? This is what artist and leader Katie Green thrives at, guiding participants through public art projects that create real personal impact and build lasting relationships through the realization of mask making and wearing. Katie Green is a Canadian visual artist who creates eerie and ethereal watercolor personas. Portrait style, these whimsical personifications are visceral reflections of a gritty and unapologetic exploration into the complexity of the human experience. Allowing the space for what's felt to show up honestly on paper, this process of creative discovery and extraction has translated into visual characters. Over Katie's career, these characters have evolved from paintings to large-scale mural works and community-driven public art projects that welcome all dimensions of the human experience. I first met Katie Green in a small lakeside town in British Columbia, Canada. In 2018, I was working for the first of many Nelson International Mural Festivals, and Katie was a muralist, tasked with painting the largest mural of the festival. In a recent conversation reflecting on our friendship, Katie described our time together as short yet potent. Over steaming bowls of pho, after long days of painting, we confided in each other, danced off a lot of life's crap, and showed up the next morning ready to paint once again. In this episode, Katie and I will discuss her trajectory as an artist and her process working with watercolor and creating larger-than-life murals. We'll also spend some time reflecting on her public art projects involving masks and the amazing participants she interacted with. If you're interested in the nature of what it means to be human and how we can see art as a reflection of our inner worlds, I think you will love this episode. Katie's spirit, vitality, sense of humor, and authentic approach to life is truly inspiring, and I'm honored to welcome her here today.
That's so sweet. That beautiful introduction. That's so nice.
Yeah, and I love that we're in our Canada colors. We've got our red and white.
I was like, this white wall. I was like, I need a pop of color.
How are you? What time is it there?
Oh my goodness, 3 o'clock. 3 o'clock.
In
the
the
day
afternoon.
before you.
Yesterday.
Yeah.
Oh, that's, yeah. The time difference always gets me. I'm like, where are we? Where am I?
Yeah.
We've got a lot of listeners across the globe, which is cool. So we're always looking at the time differences. And trying to do that.
Yeah, it's amazing to do this across such distance. Yeah, thank you so much for thinking of me.
Thank you for being here.
Mm-hmm.
So I will say many people who have watched this for years, the Friday Future Artists, won't know either of us. So this is kind of exciting and different. And I hope they enjoy it.
Mm-hmm.
Let's just get straight into it. I want to know, we've been talking a bit about language in the lead up to this, and I would love to hear you describe your work to someone who's unfamiliar with it. So never seen it before. How would you describe it?
It's a nice question. The first word that comes up is ethereal, like sort of these otherworldly characters and beings that kind of emerge through washes of color that are both concrete and suggestive at the same time. They're like delicate, but also very punchy. There's lots of bold colors and works on paper. So using inks and mediums that are very fluid. So ink and watercolor,
For people watching, I might just throw up a photo of your studio now.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And I was going to say, I feel like my practice is so multifaceted. Like there's so many different mediums that I like to explore and ways that I like to express my work. But I like to start with those paintings because it sort of feels like the seed of everything else that I do. This is look at that.
Yeah, that's
a photo when I had long hair.
You've definitely had some hairstyles. I'm like,
oh yeah,
your hairstyles. I don't know.
That's a whole other interview.
Yeah, definitely. I know I can sense that the root of your work is definitely in watercolor, and I'd like to kind of guide the conversation through. It feels like the anchor of your root is watercolors, and then it goes into, you've kind of branched off into all these different areas that are really public and not so private. And I guess I'm jumping around a bit from my script, which is fine, but I'd love to know, what's it like from going, in your studio, something that's so personal, to really crossing that threshold. And I'm just, for the people listening, I'm just showing the colossal size of this mural that Katie painted when I first met her. Just huge.
Yeah, there's the context.
Do you know how big it was?
I think it was at like 180 feet. I don't know what that is in meters, but
yeah. So going from these little, what is it, like, 4 by 5 inch, maybe 4 by 5 centimeter. I'm bad with going from these tiny things and in a private space to public entirely. Like what is that? What is that like?
Yeah, it's so interesting hearing you ask that question, because I feel like sometimes for me, like things just happen so fast, and not really like taking a moment to pause and think of that contrast, because it is like a big oscillation between those two spaces. And it feels like it's something I'm kind of always navigating and thinking about in my practice. But yeah, I think the word that comes up when you ask me that is relationship. Though it's in a public space, there is sort of this experience of intimacy that happens when you get to interact with the public. And we'll go into it later, I'm sure, but in some of my other public art projects, there's always sort of like a process-based experience where I'm including different participants in the building of the concept and the process of the artwork. So I think that's sort of like a guiding force for me. When I'm in my studio, it is more private and maybe more of an exploration of the relationship with myself. And I'm always interested in like, what do I learn there? What do I build there? And how can I connect that outwards? So I think that's the bridge sort of between those two worlds for me when I think about it. Yeah.
Yeah, and we'll talk about that in a little bit, but you do that so beautifully, and some of the documentaries you shared are just very, very moving. So that's I'm excited to talk about that. Yeah. I just want to, I guess, backtrack so we kind of started where I met you and with that. But what is, I guess, your earliest memory of making art? Like, what was the?
It's a great question. I'm having like a memory of these coloring books. Like I loved like the paint by number coloring books, just like getting into the detail of that. And yeah, I also have another memory of like my dad is an archivist and a historian, and he has all these, like, he saves everything, but he has like these tiny little sticky notes that are all over the house all the time. That's how he like documents his entire life, is on a sticky note. But I would doodle all the time on these sticky notes, like while I was on the phone or if I was in a conversation, and kind of like these unconscious sort of ways of just processing while I was in conversation usually. And I feel like art probably just started as a way like that for me, just a way to move and
Sounds like
process.
it's always around. Like it sounds like sticky notes were ever present.
Yeah. 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 And my earliest childhood, like, I don't know, I feel like my childhood memories are very like sporadic. But I'm so curious to go through my dad's archives and look at more of like the earlier little Katie artworks.
Yeah. So then I guess I'd love to talk about your process, like kind of moving into that
Yeah.
realm. How did we go from sticky notes to watercolor? What was it like when you discovered watercolor might be a better?
Yeah. Well, I had kind of an interesting like progress into art. I think it was something that was always inherent and always something that was just a natural way of me expressing myself, always being a creative person. But I really did feel like a big contrast between like what I should be doing and what I wanted to do in terms of like a career. And that was like a real sticky point for me. I think I felt a lot of pressure to pick a field of study that was going to like check these boxes. And it felt really kind of like rebellious, I guess, to go into art school and to actually pursue that. So I actually started in kinesiology, thinking I wanted to go into like naturopathic medicine, and I was interested in the body, and had developed like an injury at that time. So I was kind of curious to go into that field because it did feel, at least there was like a personal experience with that. Yeah. And then I remember there was a mandatory lab that we got assigned, and it was just like lab 1, lab 2, lab 3, and it would fit into your schedule in some way. And then 2 weeks before the semester started of the second semester, my mandatory lab was like floor hockey and wrestling. And I was just like, because I was in kinesiology. Yeah. So it was like floor hockey and wrestling. And it was funny because that was sort of like this point for me where I was like, this is like not where I want to be. Like, I don't want to be doing this. This is not aligned with what I'm passionate about, what I really want to be doing. So at that point, I kind of switched into art school. And, I actually mainly studied drawing and printmaking, etching, which was again working with paper. And then I started watercoloring my etchings. So that was sort of like my introduction into watercolor. But I actually never took painting or any studies like that. But I kind of learned over time doing it that way.
Yeah, so cool. I might just throw up this photo of some of your paintings, and again, there's going to be people listening that can't see, so I would love to hear you describe a couple of them. I've got like my idea of what some of these are, but it would be great to hear your take on it.
Yeah. So I feel like what I'm looking at is watercolor paintings, again, that are very vibrant, and sort of they're portraits, and they all sort of take like an oval or kind of circular shape. They're super emotive and expressive, depending on like the washing of color and how the eyes emerge or how the mouth emerges. They're like very kind of like whimsical almost. And this is a great exercise. I'm like, I want to hear you explain these.
Oh, I've got notes that help me a little bit. So to give people a bit of context, these were the portraits that you've used in a project that we'll talk about a little bit later on, a public art project. There's a lot to this project that we'll get into. But for our listeners, I've written that we're looking at a slide of watercolor faces that vary in emotions. We see a calm face, we see a bright animated smile, we see wonder, awe, and even stillness. It is a true bouquet of personalities, of beings, and of feelings here. And I think these works really give a glimmer, a glimpse into a side of humanity that we don't necessarily always look at, and people aren't necessarily always comfortable with, I think.
Right.
But I'd love to hear, I'll just take this one down so I can see your face again. I'd love to hear about your process with this. When did you first, did you have a first face that you discovered? Like how, and what was that like for you?
I actually brought one of my very first little paintings from this series, but I started these character portraits in 2018. So actually that would probably be like right after you and I would have met. Yeah. And I was doing a residency at the Vermont Studio Center. And I was just at a point in my artistic practice where I was just feeling kind of like some stagnation and kind of feeling disconnected from my why and what it is that I want to make work about. And it was actually quite a challenging time for me. And then on top of that, I was at this residency and there was, 55 other artists there, and you have this sort of condensed period of time where, for me at least, like feeling the pressure to create or produce, but not knowing at all what I wanted to do. And so, but with reflection and now, all this time after, like being in the discomfort of that and being in, I think that for me, I think I'll feel that again and again, like this space of regeneration and reimagining. And so, I was in this space and I was just like, I wanted to go home. Like, I was like, I don't want to be here. I just want to leave this residency, really at the edge of that discomfort. And then what I started to do was I was like, okay, if I can create a container and maybe an exercise for myself that feels manageable and approachable, maybe I can just try and show up for that every day and see what happens. And so that's why I started with really small pieces of paper. So I was like, okay, if I can even just do 3 little paintings a day, that's enough, and we'll go from there. And I also, at the time in my artistic practice, was feeling really reliant on reference imaging, and sort of feeling like I didn't know what I wanted to make work about unless I had an image in front of me that I was sort of not necessarily copying, but translating.
Yeah, so, anchored to.
Yeah, and so that was maybe another exercise that I gave myself, or I was trying to play, I guess, and bring playfulness into the discomfort. I was like, okay, I'm not going to look at any reference, just gonna try and see what's inside me and what comes out. And that was hard for sure. At first I was like, oh my gosh, it just felt really challenging. And then anyways, what ended up happening was after I ended up making almost 200 of these character paintings. And it was a really cathartic, very transformative experience for me, to sort of see all these different aspects of self that were sort of coming out and being translated from this invisible space of emotion and feeling to a more visible realm through the act of painting. And feeling an affinity towards some characters, a repulsion towards others, and just being with that and being like, wow, some of these characters I don't even recognize, but they came from somewhere within me. And how do I honor them, and how do I honor this process? And then I was having studio visits and having lots of folks come through. And it was fascinating to see also their experience and their reaction. And of course, how subjective that is, and the conversations that were coming out. And, a character could elicit a certain feeling for someone and remind them of a memory, or remind them of someone that they had met in a dream. And it was very, there was a lot of information coming for me and a lot of inspiration in terms of that relational aspect. And and then at that time, I also met a puppet builder, and they taught me this paper mache technique and this weaving technique with cardboard. And so as I was sort of going through this really deeply personal experience of making these characters, I also was like, well, how could I maybe take this a step further and take these 2D artworks and create a 3D wearable mask? And like, what would it feel like to incorporate my body and breath and movement and explore that through like self-portraiture? So that's sort of where the masks started, and also where those paintings kind of led to. But I do have like, I think the first one I made was actually not a face, but it was more of like a figure.
Yeah, and I wanted to ask you about that as well. Like, when did they evolve from the single portrait face into having hands? And I'm just gonna put one of your works up. There's a few that these ones are just lovely.
Yeah, oh, thank you.
They're the hands come. When did the hands come? How did the bodies start?
Early on. They came very early on. Oh yeah, like this is like here. Okay, here's two paintings. I could show them. These were like some of my first little ones. This one doesn't have hands,
Hold on,
but it was like more of a figure, but again, like really suggestive. But this was like another one that kind of came after that. But during that time, it was the whole figure and the portraits were kind of happening like simultaneously. But it is interesting to see the first ones. Yeah.
And then moving into mask. And it's funny how you started with body and kinesiology. Like, I think we do go full circle in our lives. There's like, it's like the universe gives us these hints and you're like, no, not that way, not that way. And we always end up coming back around to that initial thing, I think. Does it feel that way for you? Like with... Yeah,
I think so. Like, yeah, even as I was kind of thinking about that, as I was saying, I was like, oh, the body, I think, has played an important role in my practice. And it's something we can talk about more later, but something that I'm kind of starting to explore more in my studio practice.
Yeah. And I think that's a good segue to the masks, but I would love to kind of start, again, going back to your roots and talk a little bit about how your great-grandmother was making masks before.
Yes.
So I'm just going to put this one up on the screen. So that, for the listeners, there's a pretty much a carbon copy of Katie's face in clay that she's created. Yeah. So what was this like?
Well, that was interesting too, because I had already been making masks and kind of deep into that process for myself for probably 3 or 4 years, actually. And then as I was getting into that, I just kind of this click happened where I was like, oh wait, like these were masks that I saw growing up as a child all the time. So my great grandmother would do these plaster castings of different family members, and they sort of look like a little bit like death masks, but they're so gorgeous, and they're done with porcelain and clay. But they're just like, and I would see them kind of like hanging on the house, and they're all kind of embellished in different ways. And I think as a kid, they kind of shocked me a little bit, but I always knew that was like something my great grandmother did. But she passed away when I was 11. So I never had a mask made or had that process done with her. And, fast forward, I was like, realizing this connection and this link, and the masks are so different, but they're kind of, they also both speak to this notion of like archiving something. My masks are more like capturing an emotion, or maybe an aspect of self. And my great grandmother's masks feel more like they're capturing a moment in time. And also the act of making them is also so intimate, like, putting Vaseline on another's face or putting the plaster on and then like memorizing and learning like the shape of another's face. So I ended up finding my great aunt was the only person who remembered that process. And so I got to learn it from her. So I'm kind of in the process of continuing that part of legacy, which I'm excited about.
Yeah, I think like there's something so cool about like the trajectory again. Like I love to look at the whole person. And that's why I'm like, I know that probably the biggest, most pivotal part of your artwork is something that we're gonna probably talk about right now, I think. But I feel like it's so important to look back and consider where you came from, because I think really what's keeps coming up a lot in these conversations is I think there's a movement from like abstracting the world, and it almost feels like, you know, there's these masks that your grandmother made or great grandmother made that are very literal, frozen in time. They're the physical, the thing we understand, whereas your work is almost an evolution of that in a way where we've gone a little bit inward and abstracted this reality in a sense. And I think that is, it's just so cool to see I believe in the generations, they pass us things, whether we know it or not. And I think that's just, that's beautiful. So I think I might just go straight into your mask work.
Sure.
And I think the first, I've got these questions that we've kind of gone through already. So those ones were ceramic, and the ones that you start working in with public art projects, those are cardboard mostly. And I think I put this up before. So that's the back of the mask. And then
I actually have that mask here too.
Oh, beautiful. Okay.
Yeah.
If you want to, I guess I'll let you introduce it, because I'm sitting here assuming that people know and they don't know what I'm talking about. So I'd love if you could tell us about the bridge, the project.
So I kind of mentioned earlier at the residency in Vermont, when I was creating those character paintings and then wanting to sort of take them further by creating a wearable object and embodying that character in new ways. And so simultaneously, I also had my public art practice where I was painting murals, and really like wanting to find a way to engage community in what the process of public art can look like. And previously also feeling really like not knowing how to do that in a way that actually feels meaningful. And going through this process internally with making these masks, I just was like, well, this is an experience that I really want to share with other people. And what could that look like? Could that be a mural? And so this open call happened, and I applied with essentially like the foundation of that whole process. So I was able to I worked in an area called East Village in Calgary, where I live. And it's a really interesting area. Like there's lots of different community groups there. And I was able to engage with, I think there was 15 different participants from these different.
I've got a photo here I'll put up of.
So we were all like, there were people who own businesses. There is the Drop-In Center, which is a support center for unhoused folks. There was it's like a seniors housing, family services, and the public library is there. So there's lots of different people from all different walks of life. And so we were able to come together, and we did a series of 4 workshops. And I also partnered with an art therapist, which was really lovely. And essentially what I did was I brought in a selection of different portrait paintings that I had made, and kind of used them as a prompt for folks to respond to, in terms of like choosing a character that elicited a certain feeling. And whether that was discomfort or joy, it was all welcome in that space. And then the whole workshop series was then to explore, like, how does that character exist inside me? Do I want to become that character? Do I want to be concealed behind that character? So the mask sort of becomes a tool for one to conceal or reveal aspects of themselves, but also to explore their identity in new ways through like an environment where there's like relationships building, and it's done slowly over time. And the final artwork was each mural, there was 16 murals, and each surface was a final photograph, like a self-portrait of the individual in their mask as their new character. Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm just throwing a few up on the screen now. Again, for our listeners, there are these beautiful watercolored faces, and they're being modeled physically by the participants. And they've been given, I love the outfits, I love the tool. They've been given almost the bright colors to wear. And they're in these spaces that are, I think the spaces kind of give them a stage, I suppose. It's not, but the spaces, I guess, also tell a story. Yeah. And it's a bit jarring, I think, as well, because you've got the photograph that you've taken, and this is a mural that's pasted up, right? Mm-hmm. So this, you use, I forget what it's called, that wheat
paste.
Yes, yeah. And so you've got this like real photo, and then in a real space, that it just feels like you've got these kind of two realities blending. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I'm blending your two projects. I know that you've got Behind the Mask in Vernon, and you've also got The Bridge. Mm-hmm. And there's quite a difference between the trajectory of those two, which we can talk about. But I really loved this woman in particular. Stood out to me. Her name is Tazim, and she was a Bridge participant. And she said that Katie made me feel vital and important. Her insightful questions reminded me that I was worthy and unique. She looked upon me with wise eyes, making me feel powerful. She made me recognize that my voice mattered, and that feeling of connection soothed me. That is like, and that's just one of these amazing participants. Like you, and they all come from all walks of life. They come from, like you said, there's all different histories. How do you cultivate such a safe space? It feels almost inherent to you, you know? How do you hold that space? What is that practice for you in itself?
I think like before every workshop, I get so nervous, you know, like I think I get really, really nervous. And I think it's because I care so much about, thinking about that. Like, how do I create a safe space for these folks? How do I ask? I'm coming in asking a lot, right? Like asking a lot of their willingness to engage with depth. And so I think for me, when I come into those spaces, I think something that's really important is that I also come in with that I also am willing to, share my own vulnerability and come in with my full heart, come in with my fears, come in with my anxiety, come in with like all the aspects of myself that make me human, and try to make that okay. And I also host these workshops, not just on my own. Like if there is ever an opportunity for me to have support, I think that that's really important. For example, with Bridge, there was like an art therapist who was there to support, who had a lot of really, really helpful navigation and helpful holding. And in other, depending on like the community group that I do work with, sometimes there's like, a social worker who has worked with this group for an extended period of time so that they're present. And just trying to think like how many people can hold this container. And so it's the most supportive for the participating.
Yeah. And I think I would imagine having an art therapist there would add another dimension to it, right? It's not just a therapist and it's not just an artist. She's got this, this angle where they're looking at the art, and I think the process, correct me if I'm wrong, but they go around and they find the portrait that speaks to them, and then they sit with that, and then you've got a few questions that you ask them. What are those questions like? What do they kind of dive into?
Yeah, the questions like, what does this portrait make you feel? If you could speak to this character, what would you say? If this character could speak to you, what would it say? What's a typical day for this character? What are its likes and dislikes? And then there's some more like, maybe more personal questions that are extensions of those ones. So like, if there were aspects of yourself that you could reveal, what would they be? If there are aspects of yourself that you want to conceal, what would those be? Or, kind of more of those introspective questions that get you thinking about the internal and the external of one's experience.
Yeah, I love that. And then the process, just walking through it. So they finish up that, and then you have, I believe you have the cardboard as we showed. Actually, could you show it on the screen now? Could you show the one that you have?
Yeah, so we start by picking out those character portraits and doing more of a deeper exploration as like what that character means to the individual that chose it. And then I guide them through more of the practical art making, which includes like cardboard weaving. So the back of the mask is like strips of cardboard that are like, I start with one strip here and one here and that are attached around, and then you weave them using like a plier staple gun. Wow. And then the process on top is paper mache.
Oh, beautiful.
So each participant will get like the portrait that they chose will then get printed out on like a larger piece of paper, like and many copies of that portrait. And then the participant gets to tear apart that portrait and rebuild it on the form. So using paper mache and kind of like collage, and then paint back into it with acrylic.
Yeah.
I know it's like you can kind of see it, like the texture, see all the paper.
Yeah, that's lovely. It almost gives it like a skin like texture, like with having I mean, I know our skin isn't blue for the people listening. This is a blue face. Do you want to have a go at describing this for our listeners, Katie?
Yeah, it's like I'm holding up a cardboard mask, and it's like a blue face. It almost to me looks like the moon or something, like a character that could represent the moon. They have like bright red circles on their cheeks and a bright red mouth, and dark circular eyes with white pupils. And they have kind of human elements, but they're also very suggestive. Like I keep using the word ethereal and kind of like whimsical, because they're kind of surreal like characters. They're not necessarily like exactly like a portrait or a human portrait.
Yeah, that's so beautiful. And I think in the process of it as well, in watching some of your documentaries, which I recommend everybody, they'll be linked in the show notes. But there's something so special about humans who don't necessarily always get the opportunity to make art, or who are older. And I know you do a lot of these workshops with children as well, but there's something so magic about a room full of adults working with their hands, not in a factory, not for work, not for like creating, that I think is to people like us here and people listening, that might be just our everyday, but for people who it's not their everyday, like what does it feel like in that room? How does that feel when you are the one giving them the gift of like creation? Not to sound
yeah, I'm
big. You are. You are.
Yeah, I think like what I'm hearing in your question too is the word permission is coming up, and intention. Like I think when we come together in those spaces, there is the intention of creating and of exploring and of trying something and of supporting one another. And often when that permission is given, like there's like all of this like, energy comes out, and people kind of get, will say like, oh, wow, 5 hours has gone by and I haven't even noticed, and yeah, there's hesitation, there's shyness, but it's then there's some people who are like, I don't want instruction at all. Like, I'm good. I want to get into this, like, so I think it's beautiful to see, because I also see myself in all those moments. I have moments of hesitation. I have moments when I need more guidance. I have moments where I feel like in more flow. So I think it's kind of, that's happening throughout the space.
And when you do go to take these photographs, and in one of your interviews, I think you said that there comes a time when it's you almost release your art, like it's not yours anymore. It's always yours in a sense, but I'm just gonna put this photo up of the process of kind of taking these photographs and the support you give them in that way. It's just, this in itself, this process is so cool to see, and it feels, and the balloon guy is lovely. Like, it's like you've awakened these you've awakened this imagination in people that maybe they didn't even know was there, and I wonder what kind of this process was like for you, where they create the mask. What was the transformation, the before and after in some of these? And you don't have to, they might not all be the same.
Well, I'm even looking at Greg, who is on the left there with the balloons. And he was a participant. When he chose his mask, he chose it because it made him really uncomfortable. And I remember we were going around in the circle, and everyone was sharing why they chose their character and what was coming up. And, you could see sort of like some hesitation with Greg. Like, he was just like, oh, am I allowed to choose one that I don't like, essentially? And I was like, of course, that is like, that's such a beautiful seed to explore. And, those feelings are welcome here. And so, he, and in the process, so another phase of the workshop for these photo shoots is that all of these photo shoots are very like self-directed by the participants. So, when I'm asking questions like, what's a typical day for your character? What are its likes and dislikes? So much of the character development emerges in those questions. And each participant chooses their outfit, chooses their environment as it relates to the story of their character. And so Greg kind of was wanting, he's like, I don't know, I just keep seeing balloons. And for him, that process was one of like reclamation. He was like, how do I transform this feeling of sorrow and like discomfort and agony that was sort of coming up in the character of that mask? And how do I reclaim that in a way by representing it in this form? And so that was kind of like the process of Greg for those balloons.
That is so, like, there's so many layers to that. I think that you get, like, you're giving the gift of really empowering, but also uncovering. That would be really special to be part of something like that. And then to have the next layer of them being public, like that. So there's this whole, this intimate process that you share with this small group of people. And I know with the bridge that those went right out into the world. This one was one that really, really stuck in my mind, just from all the things that we see on social. But I know that the behind the mask in Vernon had a similar process with the participants, but it didn't quite make it out into the world with the mural side of things. So this is one of them. And then we've got the mock-up of the mural, I think was the previous thing. So can you tell us a bit about how what happened with that project?
So that project, the Vernon Public Art Gallery, the community coordinator had reached out to me because they had saw Bridge and really wanted to do something similar in their community. And so we partnered with a harm reduction clinic and a social worker at that clinic, working with a peer support group of 10 participants to do this mask making process. And we had gotten a grant from Canada Council to do that. And then also support from the Vernon City Council, because the project was really talking about mental health and talking about how art can play a role in supporting our process with mental health. And so they were really excited about it. I went there, I did all the workshops, all the photo shoots, and it was just such a special, special time. And then I made some mock-ups, and some news articles went out about it, just being like, new murals coming to Vernon. And someone, I still don't actually really know who, but someone saw this article and started an online petition that was titled "Say No to Scary Murals." And then I think, 4,500 people ended up signing it. A counter petition was created. Many, many people also signed that one. But it was really, really interesting because there was such a big public kind of reaction to these murals. And it ended up going back and forth with city council. They removed their support because they wanted the support of the public. Then it got caught up in an election, and all these different things. But I think for me as an artist, it was, I had complex feelings about that process for sure. But I think it was really interesting to think about the role that public art has, and that it's okay. Like for me, it's okay if it creates feelings of discomfort. What I'm really interested in, and the project did too in Calgary, like the masks, now that hearing more about the process of it, the masks are, they're gritty and they're visceral and they're truth telling. They really, really expose, a feeling and a sensation. And that I find really interesting because it asks the public to engage with that exact experience within themselves. And sometimes people don't want to do that. And that's totally okay. Like there's no right or wrong at all in this conversation. There's just curiosity and consideration, I think. And yeah, for that particular project, the person who started that petition really didn't want to see these works go up in Vernon. Also, Vernon was a place that didn't have a lot of public art. So I think also it was really interesting because there was sort of like this this group that started the counter petition that was like, this project is so meaningful. It represents a part of our community that is already invisibilized. Like we want to celebrate, that art should make us feel something. And that's that's the role of public art. And then there was a whole other population of people who were like, no, we don't want that.
But that's so interesting, right? Yes. You speak about how it's a reflection, right? Like I think in the lead up to this conversation, I called your work grotesque based on my experience of, I think I might be lagging a bit, robot-y. Based on my experience of, my background in theater, and I think grotesque is something to like be celebrated, and is, it's a cool, interesting thing. It's off kilter. And I just wonder about that. Maybe this is like the moody teenager in me, but I wonder how much of that resistance was a reflection in themselves to the work, right? Like it's just, and I think as well, I'm quite familiar with Vernon and that general area. And I think maybe they weren't ready for it just yet. Like you said, there wasn't a lot of public art to begin with. And I think there's different dimensions to it, that obviously the result was quite disheartening. But at the same time speaks to the place, right? It speaks to where they're at.
Yeah. And it's really interesting too, because when I watched how like the amount of energy expended and like the length in which people were going to stop that project from being in a public setting, it just like it did. I was like, okay, well, what would happen if we turned that energy around and like asked ourselves, like, why do I feel uncomfortable?
Yeah.
Why don't I want to see this? how does it make me feel? Am I willing to be with that feeling? What do I think the purpose of art is? What's, like there's so many questions that personally I'm like, that is the richness right there. That is like, that's the space I want to sit in with somebody. But all of that gets kind of missed when, with just wanting to shut something down right away, or wanting to reject it right away. And yeah, and it also kind of, for me as an artist, like really made me or asked of me to get clear on like, well, why is it that I'm making art? And like, what do I, what do I want to do? And how do I find the places that also connect with those values of like being in the like multiplicity and the complexity of feeling. And I was able to go to Europe last year. I went to Romania, and then I also went to Belgium, and doing the project there, it was like night and day.
They were ready for it. I think that's the thing. Yeah. That's the contrast. And I might just put up a photo of the final murals, a couple there. But I think that's the thing that we're both kind of saying, not saying. I mean, I'm saying it, but it seems as though, and what was this group of people like? Where were they? What kind of walks of life were they from? Kind of varied again, or?
Yeah, on the left, the one in the red shirt, I worked with a organization that supports folks with varying disabilities, and so I got to partner with two people who work at this organization who support like a peer support group who get together weekly and do different projects together. So I was sort of able to come in and do this workshop and take them through that whole process. And then the one in Romania, and sometimes they're also like really organic. Like that one was done more through like a public sign up. So different folks would come through and sign up.
Very cool. And that was the same kind of paste up. I wanted to ask you, because you've painted some beautiful, beautiful murals, right? But would you ever consider, and maybe it would make it a colossal project, but would you ever consider actually physically painting these pictures? Like, have you actually? I don't think you have.
No, I haven't. I feel like it almost is like unnecessary, just because the process is so, like the mural is of course like the finished piece, but also like it is photo based. And there's something kind of neat about like the paper mache process of the masks, and then sort of like, again, printing them on paper and sort of paper macheing and adhering them to the wall. And I really I love that the mask, because it is a painted object, it almost creates this like strange illusion where when you're standing in front of the mural, you can't really tell if the mask is like painted, and then it contrasts like the hyper realism of someone's hands. And there's this really interesting tension that I like as well. And in the past, sometimes like I've painted into them, like I've done layers of acrylic on top, but I think that they work just so beautifully as photos.
Yeah, no, that makes so much sense. I see that as well with the paint. Like the painting is a bit jarring. It's where you expect to see a human and a face, and there's the hands there and the body, and then it's like, oh, what's this that you're being faced with? And I think that's it ties back into the language that we use, I think, and really it is it gives people the opportunity to make their own decisions. And I think I guess they say that like art is only good if you get a response, and sometimes that response can be positive and sometimes that response can be negative, but the worst response you can get is nothing, right?
It's nothing.
So I think that they're evocative in so many different layers to the public once they get out into the world, and then obviously for that person that's participating, it would be such a special experience for them to kind of go through that transformation. So you said as well that it's nice to go back to these places and connect with these people again. Do you find that you've got a nice like relationship with them, like a long-term kind of friendship?
Yeah. Yeah. Like Taz and I still chat all the time, or sometimes like I'll go, she's an artist. And so I'll go and like see her openings or her shows. And I've also heard too, like, that relationships are still forming with folks that met each other in those workshops, which I find really lovely.
Cool.
That sort of feels more like, the legacy of a project, when public art can be pretty impermanent. But these relationships seem like long lasting. Yeah.
Yeah. What would you like if you had advice for someone, maybe who's someone in our audience might be interested in working with different groups or doing some public art projects? Do you have any advice that you would give on getting started with that?
Honestly, like writing me a message. Like I feel like when I first started creating murals, it was because I had the support of other people who were at a different stage in their journey, who I either got to paint alongside, or I got to assist, or got to ask questions. I think, yeah, like I just feel like I'm such an advocate for artists supporting artists, and sometimes that doesn't always feel available, because there can just be these like feelings of scarcity, or wanting to sort of like hoard process, or these types of things, or technique. But yeah, I am like connecting with other artists and like asking questions. We're such a wealth of knowledge. Yeah.
Yeah, I think we're in the right place. I think everybody that's listening would be in the right place. That's awesome. I also wanted to ask on a smaller scale, just to loop back around, with your watercolor, for someone who's looking to find a face, where do you start? Where would they start?
Yeah. That's a great question. I love that question. I like creating like relationship with the medium itself. Sometimes I'll get in my studio and I can really tell when I'm imposing. Like I can tell when I'm trying to put an idea or like a form. And often what will happen for me with that is like things get really repetitive, or I just don't feel like as connected with the piece. And so sometimes like what I'll even do is just close my eyes and I'll wet the paper first, and then I'll just use my left hand sometimes, or I'll just like drop ink or make some marks. And then I'll take the piece of paper and I'll turn it and I'll turn it and I'll, until a shoulder like appears, or the jaws or an eye, or like I'm really looking for what the medium wants to like show me. And I often feel like those are the most magical moments, because I'm being really present and I'm not trying to like impose an idea, but I'm allowing it to reveal itself to me. And it's really fun, because I'll make something like, I'll be like, wow, I could have never thought of that. I could have never thought of the shoulder there, or an eye, or like the shape of a mouth, and it's exciting. So I would say like maybe even just dropping ink on a piece of paper and seeing what emerges and what you see.
I love that. I love that as a practice. You can invite everyone to do that. Maybe I'll try that later today. Well, thank you so much, Katie. This has been so nice chatting, and so good to see you again after all these years. Too long.
Yeah. Thank you for your thoughtful questions. And it feels so nice to just be able to pause and kind of reflect on like a history and a path, and getting to really root into the why. So I appreciate this time to chat together.
Yeah. And with that said, before you go, I would love to know where you're going next. What are you doing? Tell us.
I'm in the process of like really wanting to get back into my studio practice. It can be like an interesting balance between doing public art and finding time to just be in my studio. So I am working on like a new body of work that is very in like the little seed stage. And then, yeah, I'm going to be going to Montreal in June and doing a mural festival there. And doing a lot of teaching right now, which I love. I do a lot of residencies in schools, but with youth and with adults, but going through this process of mask making and it's lovely. I really love teaching. So been doing more of that.
Oh, awesome. Yeah. Well, we'll make sure that all of your good stuff, your website, your Instagram, everything's in the show notes for people to visit. She's got some beautiful prints on her website. So go and support Katie, please.
Oh, thank you.
And come to Australia anytime. We would love to have you.
Yes. Oh my gosh.
For you to come to
I would love that.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Katie.
Thanks, everybody.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. Bye.